there we go. And so this month
The floating head at the beach. He's cracking me up right now. I'm sorry.
was that.
I said Mike is just a floating head at the beach. He's cracking me up right now.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, that's when the Zoom background goes off. All right. So
I'll try to stay in the camera for you guys.
please do, Mike. So this month for the Westside Meetup, we have Chris will join us, and I'll do just a quick summary intro, and then you can do maybe a more in-depth intro about your experience. I met Chris, like formally met Chris. I think it was just right around a year ago, like the last weekend of January, when I was out at a land trust seminar in Stockton that Mr. Land Trust was holding. I forgot the gentleman's name, just skipped my mind. And Chris was there, and I seen him before, and we started talking, and turns out we were at the same brokerage at EXP Realty. And then he shared about his background, and he has quite a background that he'll talk about a little bit. But he's in the commercial real estate space, and so I asked him to join us today and share just a little bit about how you can be successful in commercial real estate, and also what the market's doing. Kind of those two focuses, but we can expand. And our plan is that Chris will kind of do an intro and have a formal time where he presents, and then we will have time after that to ask questions and have collaborative discussion, and throw questions out to Chris, and then talk about the market and maybe anything else you guys have. And then before we move over to breakout sessions, we'll have to let Chris go because he's actually out of state right now for a family emergency. So my goal or plan is that we can maximize our time with Chris, and then be able to let him go and continue with networking after that. So Chris, go ahead. I'm going to do a screen share.
Thank you so much,
You guys
Sergi.
see that? Mm-hmm.
It's great to be here. I actually live in Auburn, California, but now I am about an hour west of Knoxville, 2 hours east of Nashville, visiting my parents because of a medical emergency out here. So I actually started in commercial real estate as a kid because my family, we started farming just north of Sacramento when I was between 5th and 6th grades. So we moved from Oklahoma originally, where we were farmers, and we lived in Sacramento in the country club Arden Arcade area. But there's one thing about farmers: you can take the farmer off the farm, but you can't take the farm out of the farmer. And so my parents, they decided to get some land just north of Alberta, California. And most of you probably know where the rice paddies are out towards the airport. So we started out raising cattle and beans and wheat and different things like that. And then we started raising rice when I was in high school. So we grew our farm from 65 acres. So we started out really small to 15 years later, we had about 3,000 acres that we were farming. And so that meant that I spent a lot of time running around the countryside with my dad in the pickup truck, talking to different people about buying, leasing, and selling commercial real estate, because ag land, farmland, is one of the segments of commercial real estate. I went off to college in Southern California, and while I was in college, I worked in a marketing capacity for a company that sold pre-development land in SoCal. After college, I went into financial planning, became a certified financial planner, and was also a stockbroker. So I sold real estate syndications back in the 80s, and my practice areas for finance were asset protection planning, entity structuring, estate planning, and taxation. So anytime one of my clients had a need in one of those areas, they would call me up and I would consult with them on their real estate projects. The funny thing is when I graduated from college in 1983, I actually was started to work on my real estate license, but I never finished it. So one of the, probably if I was to go back and do anything different in my career, it would have been to get my real estate license in 1983 instead of waiting until 2017, because I could have done so much better having been involved in real estate for all that time. So throughout my career, I did a lot of consulting. In 1998, I started doing forensic accounting for a company in the Silicon Valley and ended up engineering and then executing a hostile takeover in October of 1999. And by hostile takeover, what I mean to say is that my team and I walked in the front door of the company at 4:45 in the afternoon, just before closing, accompanied by 2 plainclothes police officers carrying handguns and handcuffs. The next morning, I was introduced to the company as the new CFO, COO. And one of my responsibilities at the company was negotiating all of our real estate transactions for our commercial real estate. But one of the things about working really hard is you can end up having kids that grow up wondering who their dad is. And so we were living in Sacramento and then we moved up to Auburn, and I was gone so much of the time. I would come home, the kids would be like, well, who is this strange guy coming in the house on the weekends, right? And I didn't want my kids growing up singing that Harry Chapin song. And it goes like, cats in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue and the man in the moon. And so I didn't want them singing that as the theme song of their life. So I decided to take some time off. So I retired, and my kids were 8, 10, and 12 at the time. 8, 10, 12, and 14, 4 kids. And I told my wife that when the kids were grown, I'd find something interesting to do. So that something interesting is commercial real estate. So I started in commercial real estate just a little bit over 2 years ago. In my first year, listed over $250 million in commercial listings, mainly multifam in the San Francisco Bay Area. Now I lead a team of agents, and we're active in 9 states across the United States. And I help real estate agents affect commercial real estate transactions all over the place. So just about an hour and a half ago, I finished up with a long call with a couple of agents I'm working with from New York and Florida, because we have a client that has a portfolio of single family homes. There's 14 different properties, and they're either single family or duplexes. The client is highly motivated to liquidate these properties. And when I was told about these properties, I was told that they were in kind of ghetto area. And so we were looking at the photographs last night. I was working with the agent, and today we were looking at it, and I was really surprised how beautiful some of these properties are. They do not look like distressed properties. And what I come to look at distressed properties when you drive through, say, Oakland or Rio Linda or something like that. In fact, the first property that we pulled up on the screen with the client tonight, trying to look at them, the client said, I said, wow, that is just such a beautiful looking property. I mean, it looks like it was just redone. And they said, well, actually, 5 years ago, all the siding on the house was replaced, the roof was replaced, and the interior was totally redone. And I'm like, really? And the funny thing about it is that based on what the bank appraiser for a refi came up with, the price was almost identical to the amount of money that they put into the property in renovations. So it's kind of amazing. So if any of you have the wherewithal to take down a portfolio of 14 houses, not using creative financing, because these people need a cash offer or someone who has cash and financing already lined up. So wholesaler, sorry, this isn't the right deal for you. Let me know. And by the way, I'd really like it if everyone would do me a favor, and that is go into the chat and just put your information. So if you don't mind, I just put my information in there so that you can see who I am. And do you guys mind if I teach you a quick trick about LinkedIn? Is that okay? So
Yeah,
do you see my name there? How I have my name with my phone number right after it? So if you go up to the top right corner of your video screen, and you'll see it says mute, and then it has 3 little dots and a blue box. And if you go into that where the 3 dots are, you can click rename. And when you rename, you can add your cell phone number if you'd like people to contact with you. And one of the cool things about that is, if you look at the chat where I just put my information in, you'll see that my cell phone number is part of my name in the chat. Now, I don't see my cell phone number. It just says you or me or whatever it is. But everyone else can see my name and my cell number, and it's a great way to network when you're on Zoom. So I hope you don't mind I tossed that in for free today. So anyhow, it's been an interesting ride, and I'm really excited about the future because our team is expanding. We started out with just myself pre-COVID, and now I've got 13 people on my team, and we're having a lot of fun affecting commercial and residential real estate transactions across the United States. So thank you very much for including your information in the chat for everyone who wants to network. And it would be a really good idea if you go ahead and include your email address and your cell number if you want people to connect with you. So let's go ahead, and you might have seen the slide there. This last year has been a very good year for me in commercial real estate. In fact, I was invited to join the Board of Governors of the Commercial Brokers Association, which is based out of the San Francisco Bay Area. And then the Board of Directors, Board of Governors, they elected me to be the vice chair of the association for 2021, and I'll be the chair of the association for 2022. And what you're seeing tonight is actually a presentation that I put together for later this week, where I'll be presenting for the California Association of Realtors at their commercial conference. So those of you who are realtors, feel free to invite your friends, go up to car.org, and if you look for the Commercial Investment Forum, you can see a registration link so you can see this, the presentation materials that I'll be going over tonight in a more condensed manner if that interests you. And thank you, those of you who are putting your information in the chat. The other thing that would be nice is if you would also put down what city you're in, because I know like James, and was it Gina that's there with James in Montana? You know, that's kind of fun to try to keep track of where people are. All right, let's go to the next slide. So what we want to talk about tonight is launching in commercial real estate in 2021. And the interesting thing about this is, even though I'm talking about commercial real estate, the same things are really true no matter what you want to accomplish in life. If you do these things and you apply them to what you're doing, I think it's a great path towards success. So the first thing is choose your lane, choose your niche, or some people like to say niche, because you know it's been said a lot that the riches are in the niches. And when you figure out what it is that you can really excel at, then that is something that if you focus on it, then you can get to be really good at it, and people will get to know you as someone who's really good at that niche. And so my general niche is commercial real estate. My specific branding that I use is I am your professional connector. And that's really what we do in real estate. For those of us who are agents, is we connect with people. I like to tell people that commercial real estate is really like playing the memory game. And some of you probably have kids or grandkids where you play, you know, you flip the cards over in pairs, and then you have to memorize what's on the card, and then you flip them back over, and then you flip over different ones, and you grab the matching ones, right? The memory game. And so I like to think that I play the memory game, but I don't have to have a good memory. I just have to make really good notes. Because if I make good notes of who is looking for what, and then I keep asking people, well, hey, what are you in the market for? What do you have to offer? Then pretty soon I run up with matches. And it's like, oh, so Mike is looking for this and DJ has the same thing that Mike is looking for. Now I just need to connect them and hopefully earn something off of putting the transaction together. Does that make sense? So choose your niche. In commercial real estate, we have what we like to call the 4 major food groups. Most everyone is familiar with multifamily and retail. And then of course there's office and industrial. And then there's subgroups or minor food groups, things like we talked about earlier, agricultural. That would be a food group, but it's not something that most people are focused in unless of course you're out in the country. And then you have more land brokers. Restaurants is another subgroup, which is a subset of retail. And so when we're going through and talking about this, I'll just go ahead and throw in some market information. Is that all right? So for example, multifamily. Multifamily in the Bay Area is tending to be having some problems because there's a lot of people in the Bay Area that are realizing that, wow, here I've been working on Zoom and stuff, and my company has said that we're not going to actually reopen the offices till maybe January of 22. I don't have to actually live close to the office. So that's causing a bit of a migration from San Francisco out into the Central Valley and beyond. I mean, I'm hearing of people who are moving not just towards Sacramento, but even out of state because they can now telecommute instead of commute. And so what I've been seeing is I've been seeing greater demand for multifamily in the outlying areas and reduced demand in the urban core or downtown areas. In fact, you know, I've been seeing some people saying that they're seeing the multifamily prices or vacancy rates moving into the double digits in some spaces, whereas the vacancy rates in, say, Sacramento have been on the decline. That's also affected our residential sales market too. We're having a lot of stuff that's going on the market, and the number of listings that are available, the absorption rate is really, really low right now as far as the number of listings available, and the turnover is really rapid. So that's kind of where we're at with the residential. So residential hasn't been hurt near as badly as people have expected. It'll be interesting to see with government policies, especially, you know, and it has been one of these surprising things to me, because there's a lot of people that if you're told, hey, look, you don't have to pay rent, they don't pay rent. But I think people are sometimes smarter than government gives them credit for, because they're realizing that if I don't pay my rent, I'm going to lose my space. And if I lose my space, then I'm going to be homeless. And they don't want to live in a tent in Oakland or something, maybe like some other people do. So I have the rentals or the multifamily properties I have over in the Bay Area. They actually haven't had that much of a negative impact because of COVID, which has been good for the owner of those properties. In fact, because interest rates went down and he's on a variable interest rate, his monthly payments actually declined, and he was making substantially more net profit on his properties in the Bay Area than he was previously. So retail, I think most of us have probably been a lot more active in using the online shopping services like Amazon. And so one of the natural consequences of that, the malls, big retail establishments, you know, they have gone down in traffic. And now there's a big push for looking at malls and seeing how they can be repurposed for other things. So one of the things that some places are doing is they're actually repurposing the malls as being more local distribution centers, so that they're delivering a lot of the goods to what used to be the retail stores, and they're using those as distribution centers so that the local delivery drivers are picking up the packages ready to go to people and then distributing to them there. industrial has been a big winner during COVID. And so especially things like cold storage. Cold storage, because when we first hit COVID, do you remember how it was like going into, the pictures that we used to see of the Cold War, where people would go shopping in the communist and socialist countries, and there'd be nothing on the shelves. I remember I think it was Friday, March 14th, I was down at Costco in Roseville, and I walk in the door and I see that the generator that I've been wanting to get was on sale. So I grabbed a flat, put one of those big generators on it, and then I went through the store and I was picking up the things I needed. And all of a sudden I started realizing when I got over to the food section, how much stuff was missing. It amazed me when I saw that the freezer cases were basically bare, with no dairy product at all, no meat. The only thing that I saw that was meat was like some of that plant-based meat stuff. And that was the only meat product that was left. And I'm like, that can stay. I'm not picking that up, because I'm a carnivore. I'm not as much of a plant eater. But it was really interesting. And I actually took some pictures of seeing the long lines, because that evening there were two lines that went from the registers, one against the far wall and one right down the center of the store. And they both went clear back to the back of the store. And people are looking at me and they're like, man, you're really hardcore, aren't you? You must be a prepper. You even got your generator on your flat. So that was kind of fun. But anyhow, so the industrial has really had a boost. And so we've seen industrial values increase. We've seen the amount of product on the market decline. And so that's been really good for those people in the industrial market. What's another subsection that I can talk about? Oh, QSRs. Does everyone know what a QSR stands for? Let's just do a pop quiz here. If you know what a QSR is, put it in the chat for us real quick, okay? QSR. QSRs are something that have seen a big surge during COVID times. Does no one know what a QSR is? I guess that's what I get for coming to a residential meetup, right? So they stand for quick serve restaurants. So all those drive-throughs and everything, those are in demand because people haven't been able to go into the restaurants to eat. And hopefully that'll be changing soon. And so there's a lot of demand as people start thinking that maybe there's going to be more pandemics and stuff in the future. How are they going to provide for, or, prepare to survive and thrive during the next one? And so vacant parcels or end units that could be converted to have drive-up space, those are in great demand right now. So the QSRs. Office. We haven't talked about office, have we? So this is one of the things that's really fascinating is, they're thinking that office is going to take a big hit. And there's two sides of the coin, so to speak, right? There's the people who are just screaming doom and gloom, doom and gloom. And there's other people who are like, well, now's a good time to buy this stuff. And so let's go out and try to buy it. And they're finding that the prices aren't down near as much as they expected. In fact, hospitality. How many of you have stayed in a hotel since March 14th? Anyone? So my wife and I actually stayed at a hotel down by the Sacramento airport Friday night. And there weren't that many people staying in the hotel. And so, but it was much greater than it was, say, back in, I think it was May or June. My wife and I took a road trip up to Seattle and we stayed at some hotels. We like to drive about halfway to Seattle and stay someplace, and then we come back and stay about halfway too. And the first night we stayed at one of the Marriott properties. It was the first night they'd reopened since COVID had hit. And I think there were 6 guests in the entire place. 6 rooms were rented out of like 150 rooms. And so there's a lot of distress right now in the hospitality sector. But on the other hand, there's a lot of people out there trying to bottom fish, being bottom feeders and take advantage of that. In fact, some of the lending institutions have already taken back some of the property, or the properties, pretty close to foreclosure. And so the owners are trying to negotiate to preserve some of their equity. And some of the banks are being really hard-nosed right now about wanting to negotiate, because they would rather not take a haircut on it, because they think that 6 months to a year from now, hospitality is going to have a big resurgence, and that they're actually going to be able to recoup their what their loan value was, plus maybe even make a profit. So how's that for a little bit of a market update in the commercial space? All right, so let's talk about skilling up. I think it's always important that we are lifetime learners and we're always improving our skills. And so one of the things that I would encourage everyone to do is try to learn something new every day. Coming to events like this is a really great opportunity to learn something new. There's also commercial classes available. And in fact, the Commercial Brokers Association, which is based out of Pleasanton, they're now offering a series of 22 classes that could be a good foundation for anyone who's interested in commercial real estate. They're being taught from a realtor perspective. And I always find that if you're not a realtor and you're working with realtors, it's a good idea to get to know what their mentality is and their mindset, so you can relate to them. So the classes are very affordable. And even if you're not a realtor, you can sign up for the classes, take the classes. They're typically right around 2 hours each class. And I put together a package with the Commercial Brokers Association. So you can take 15 classes and have a 1-year membership in the Commercial Brokers Association as a non-realtor for only $720, which is, I think it's a great deal, with being about $48 per class for those 15 classes. So if that interests you, please pop me a message and I'll connect you with that information. Okay, so there's a lot of other information that's out there that's available. If you search the Meetup groups, or you search for like the local CCIM chapters or other groups that are hosting meetings, there's a lot of people that are hosting meetings online. Some of them won't be quite as welcoming to non-realtors, but others, they don't mind. And so sometimes you just have to go in and lurk quietly in the background and see if it's a group that you can learn from and if you're welcome there. All right. When I am working with realtors, because that's what I do mainly, is I work with realtors and training realtors how to be successful. I find that most people want to spend all of their time learning, and they're not actually doing. And Denora, thanks for putting that message there. If you could just send me a text. Text is really the best way to connect with me. Send me your name, your email, and why you'd like to connect. And that way I can get back to you. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
And after the meeting, I will be sending out an email to all attendees, and I'll have Chris, your info on there, and I can include the information on the classes as well, so we can connect after, and you let me know what to include.
I will send you a image, a JPEG that you can put. There's a series of classes that started 2 weeks ago. And when you sign up for the classes, you can take the classes by video if you're not available while the classes are going. So you can actually catch up and enjoy the classes that have passed, and then get caught up and take the rest of them live. Or if you have a day job or you're not able to go to a class one day, then they'll automatically send you the video recording of the class that you missed.
And I think they're spread out throughout multiple months, right? So it's not a rigorous schedule, so it's pretty easy to do like one. I think it's like one class a week or something. Or
it's
2 weeks, right?
It's 2 classes at a time.
Mm-hmm.
There's a class at I think it's 10 o'clock in the morning and then 12:30 in the afternoon. Classes are 2 hours each. And they're basically every other week from now through the end of March to get through the core. And then there's 3 electives, and the electives go through for April, May, June, and July maybe. But there's typically 1 or 2 days of instruction per month. And I think March is the only month where there's actually 3 days of instruction, just because it ends up being the first week and the middle week and the last week, because I think there's 5 weeks in March. Okay. Hey, thanks for that, Sergi. Appreciate it. All right. So as I was starting to say, is taking action. Taking action is really, really important, because you can spend all of your time learning and never act on that knowledge. And people say that knowledge is power. And I think that's really wrong. Knowledge is not power unless you act on it. So I like to say applied knowledge is power. So it's a little bit of a variance on what people like to tell you. Applied knowledge really is power. Oh, and for those of you who want to learn more about more creative things that you can do with commercial real estate, there's a YouTube channel that you can subscribe to. Some of you probably are aware of it. It's Peter Harris's Commercial Property Advisors. So Commercial Property Advisors. And he's promoting his service where he teaches people how to use creative skills like master lease agreements and things like that to acquire commercial real estate. But those videos are directed towards non-realtors. You know, those are directed towards investors. So I wanted to make sure and add that. So ready, set, action. Don't wait to take action. I'm one of these guys that I jump out of the airplane, and while I'm jumping out of the airplane, I'm on my phone to Amazon Prime Instant Delivery. I'm like, hey, I got 15 seconds to deliver a parachute or I'm going to go splat. And I don't go splat very often. So, all right. The next thing is networking. And networking, you've got to really put yourself out there. You've got to go to events. While we can't go to things face to face, I commend each of you for coming to the Zoom call tonight and interacting. You know, the reason that I put my cell phone number right there at the bottom of the screen with my face is it's a subtle invitation for people to reach out and connect with me, right? And so another thing to do when you're on Zoom or whatever is always be sure and interact in the chat. Make sure that you put your contact information in the chat. Even if people don't ask you to, think of a good reason to reach out to people, even if it's like saying hello. And if you put your phone number or your email address as part of your name, now anyone who's looking at the chat, they know who you are and they have a way to connect with you. And there's a lot of opportunities out there to network. And so one of the things a lot of people don't think about is, let's say that you are interested in a specific type of property in the commercial space. You know, there's subgroups of people who network within property types. If you are wanting to do, you know, like retail space or office space, you know, BOMA, which stands for the Building Owners and Management Association, you know, they have meetings. There's meetings for property managers and different people like that. And so there's a lot of different opportunities to go out and network. Even think about lawyers. You know, if you go to, say, probate lawyers, estate planning lawyers, you know, to their meetings, that can give you a leg up in dealing with, you know, professionals in an area where you can maybe find some great opportunity. Okay. All right. Data, 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 or some people like to say data, data, data. So commercial real estate isn't rocket science, but it definitely involves a lot of analytics. With my background as a certified financial planner, I spent most of my career engaged in analytics and dealing with data. So commercial real estate is a real natural for me. Many of you, you're doing deal analysis, whether it's on single family or multifamily or whatever, and you know what your formulas are and what you have to do to be able to analyze a deal to see if it'll make sense. And as investors, you're not as concerned about the fact that there's maybe weird purple wallpaper hanging in the bathroom, or one of the kids painted their room really strange, because you can see past that and see that there's just a little bit of work that needs to be done to correct that small defect in the property. But if you have the data so that you know what you're looking at, then that gives you an edge over everyone else. And you really have a super edge when you learn how to use that data properly. The final thing in my list of skills to do to be successful as you launch into commercial real estate is, if you really want to master something, teach it. Find people who know less than you do, share your knowledge, and as they start to catch up with you, if you're a good teacher, you know you have to keep ahead of them. So that's going to drive you to learning some more. So those are kind of my 6 little points of things that you can do to launch into commercial real estate this year. I think they're pretty basic things. It's certainly nothing that you haven't heard before, but hopefully we've added a little bit of a different slant to it. So if anyone has any comments, questions, hopefully no snide remarks, but now would be a great time for us to have some interaction.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so let's jump into the questions and comments, thoughts you might have. I know there were a couple questions that I think I saw in chat. So you guys go ahead and you can ask directly.
I have a question here.
Go for it.
Nice to meet you, and thank you very much for the presentation. I already learned a lot of stuff.
Cool, thanks, Ian.
I'm here in Sacramento, and I just had a question. What are your thoughts on wholesaling commercial properties? Because, as you know, a lot of times you're listed with a broker, and, we're not trying to step on anyone's toes or go around anybody. So what are your thoughts on someone like me who's not a licensed agent in California, but, maybe I want to approach a seller and say, hey, I have a buyer that might be interested in your product or in your property. What are your thoughts on trying to do a wholesale technique with commercial real estate?
Well, so Peter Harris, I mentioned him earlier, the commercial property advisors. He basically is teaching people how to wholesale. And so I think there's definitely a niche for that. And if that's what you want to pursue, then I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And the way that I look at crisis and transition is, when things are going through transition, there's a lot of people in crisis. Like I was talking earlier about the 14 single family and duplexes, properties that are out in Rochester, New York. We're at a point where a lot of the tenants have simply decided, hey, I don't have to pay rent. I'm going to get evicted. There's going to be plenty of other inventory out there. So I'm going to conserve the money instead of paying the rent. And it's put the people into crisis. So they're at the point where they want to sell instead of continue to manage, property. And there's going to be a certain segment of owners out there that are willing to do wholesaling or maybe do master lease agreements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm trying to be objective here. How's that sound?
Yeah, no, that's good. I just wanted to kind of hone in on, kind of the ethics of it. Like, I don't want to upset anyone who has it listed, but, if I work directly with the seller, they might get cut out. So what are your thoughts on doing it that way? What's the proper way to do that? If I'm, I'm not a licensed agent, but I just want to try to help that person sell the property. Maybe they're motivated to sell, maybe they're desperate, and them listing it with this broker isn't going anywhere, but I'd like to just come in and help them sell it. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So in commercial real estate, as an agent, okay, whenever I'm looking at a prospective buyer, I'm always qualify the buyer to make sure that they actually qualify for the property before I'll ever present an LOI. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with the process with commercial real estate, We typically will present a letter of intent, and we use the letter of intent to negotiate to get to a contract, rather than presenting a purchase sale agreement and then negotiating with counteroffers after that to get to a final contract. And what I find is that commercial real estate is more arduous. And if you have an owner who's willing to be creative in their financing, I think wholesaling has a definite place, that it can be a value in the market. When you're dealing with people who need to have, conventional financing, I think it's more difficult. And one of the reasons is because a lot of brokerages are specifically prohibited for dealing with a transaction that involves a wholesaler. If you've got great connections, and you can negotiate something legally, and I'm not even going to talk about what's legal and not legal because that's outside of my purview. I'm not going to practice law on a Zoom call. There may be an opportunity for you. What?
Consult with my attorney, correct?
Consult with your attorney. And I always recommend that my clients, whether I'm representing the buyer, the seller, the landlord, or the lessee, that they always have an attorney that is consulting with them and looking out for their best interest from a legal perspective. The law is complex, and I'm not going to pretend to know all the nuances.
Well, thank you very much for your time and answering my questions. Appreciate it.
So did I dance around that just enough?
Just enough. Yeah. Like I said, I just, if I'm getting into this, I don't want to, I know I'm probably going to upset some people, but, I want to try to do it as ethically and like as honestly as I can, and try not to upset people.
Yeah.
So just want to make sure
with commercial real estate, it's more difficult, I believe. And maybe there's someone out there who's done wholesaling in commercial. But it's more difficult to actually get a transaction across the finish line in the wholesale transition.
Okay.
So,
Thanks
but
again.
there are people out there that do it. Okay, thanks, Ian. Who is next? Anyone else have something they'd like to contribute to the discussion today?
I think there was a question in the chat as well about mini storage and what your thoughts are on where that would go.
Sorry, I forgot to address that. I did see that pop up. So mini storage, I started in real estate on the sales side as a stockbroker back in 1983. And one of the things that they were promoting back in the early 80s was that mini storage is a great investment. I was down in Southern California. I lived in a garden style apartment complex in Anaheim back in like 84, 85. And when I was selling public storage, syndications actually. And the presentations for the wholesale rep, which is not a wholesaler, but he was the representative of public storage that went out and talked to the stockbrokers, was, hey, look, here we have a product. It's 4 walls with a door in it, usually a roll-up door. Sometimes the smaller units only had a man door. Maybe they don't even have a light bulb. They're unpainted walls that are, what do you call it when you put the plaster on to cover the nail holes?
Drywalled. Mud
yeah,
over.
It's drywalled with mud on it, and that's it. No paint. And the cost of doing that, you have no toilets. Your eviction process is really easy. I mean, basically, if people don't pay, there's a certain amount of time, and then the storage operator takes possession of the goods and is able to auction them off, right? So you don't have to worry about squatters. You don't have to worry about people living in the units and trying to evict them. And the funny thing is back even in the 80s, we were finding that the cost per square foot for storage was about the same as, not the D class, but maybe like a C or even a B minus apartment. And yet, so your profit margins can be much greater. And so mini storage is something that I've been watching for almost 40 years. and it does really well with weathering through economic cycles. When people are in a down cycle and maybe they have to downsize their house, but they don't want to give up all their goods, they get a storage unit. And then when the cycle improves, they typically don't want to move all their stuff, so they keep paying the storage fees. Or people accumulate more stuff, but they don't want it cluttering up their house, so they get a storage unit. Just today, I was involved in a commercial class where we were looking at how to prospect for commercial real estate clients using mortgage data. And multiple people in the group, as we were prospecting, were like, hey, show us how to do this with self-storage properties. And self-storage is actually a really good class of or subclass of investments. It's not one of the major four food groups, but it definitely, there's a lot of interest. And there's a lot of opportunity for people who learn how to do this and want to specialize in self-storage, to find those small mom and pop self-storage operators who, just like with single family residents, landlords, they maybe have had that rental unit for a decade or two, and they haven't done a really good job of keeping the rents up to market. You see the same thing in self-storage, where maybe they've already paid off the property and they haven't refinanced it. They've got a really low cost basis. They got their mortgage a long time ago. Maybe they've already paid off their mortgage, and they're making good money, and they don't realize that they could be making 3 or 4 times more money simply by raising the rents to market, because they haven't gone out and done rent surveys to see that, the franchise storage people like Public Storage or one of the other, brand names, that they're charging, 2 or 3 times what they're charging. The other thing is if you do get into into a storage type situation and you become an owner operator, you now have an opportunity, once you have experience in the space, of getting a small business administration loan, so that you can now go in with the help of the government. And now that you have a track record and you're showing that you are making money with the facilities that you already have, and it typically requires 2 tax returns plus whatever your partial year, sometimes 3 tax returns plus your partial year to qualify for SBA loans. And you can do it with 10% down. And that's typically 25-year fully amortized financing. Sometimes depending on what lender you're working with, it might be a 10-year note on the bank portion, but it's still a 25-year note on the SBA side. And the blended rate between those 2 notes is right now running in the low 3s a lot of times, I'm seeing.
Wow.
So storage, I think, is a great opportunity. So speaking of lending, would you guys like to hear a little bit about lending in the commercial space?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So those of you who are buying single family homes or duplexes, your typical residential, not commercial residential, you're used to getting financing where it's very low down. And in the commercial space, SBA is really about the only place where you can get the low down stuff. When you're looking as an investor, you're typically looking, I just recently heard that they're starting to loosen up a little bit on multifam, where someone said that they just had a client who qualified with only 25% down. Last summer, we were working on a small commercial project down in LA. It was only 16 units for just $4.2 million, right? For 16 units. And even though the investor owned 32 single family and duplex rental properties, the lender still was requiring that they had professional property management for that 16 unit complex. And they had to set up reserves of approximately 6 months payments just to be able to get the loan. Oh, and it was 35% down. So commercial lending practices are very, very different than residential. So if you're not familiar with it, be sure and actually sit down with a qualified commercial mortgage broker and look over your situation. The other thing that you're going to find is you may have money, you may have great credit, but the property has to qualify. And so you might say, hey, look, here's my plan, here's my pro forma for a property, but the commercial lenders aren't necessarily going to look at what you're going to do to the property. They're still going to base their lending decision based on what the performance has been for the property over the last 24 months. Okay, so I've kind of babbled on a little bit here. Hopefully you found that. Anyone give me a thumbs up for you've learned anything interesting?
Yeah.
A couple of thumbs up, thank you. Okay, so what else is on your mind while we're here? What else would you like to know about commercial real estate?
I have a quick
Everything you've been afraid to ask. How's that sound?
I have a follow-up question to what you just mentioned about financing. Would it make,
Yeah.
so let's say if I wanted to purchase a multifamily property and, ultimately a larger, 50, 70 unit property, right? Would it make sense to start off with a smaller property like a 10 unit or 14 unit so that once I go up to a larger property, the financing will be easier, or it'll be easier to get financing because having the 14 unit property experience is a much better experience than having 25 single family homes. Is that's something that I've heard in as far as lending goes? Is that true, and would that be a logical step as an entrance step into commercial property ownership?
I would highly recommend that if you are interested in, moving from residential to commercial residential, that you get a 5 or 6 unit property, something small that just barely qualifies as commercial because it's totally different lending standards. And when you show that you have a track record of being able to manage that, it's much easier to be able to move into a larger property or add to your portfolio than if you just have single family. Or, when I talk about residential real estate, it's 1 through 4 units. And so definitely, I highly recommend that.
Gotcha. Hey, Ezra, I see you have a question in the chat. Go ahead and you can ask directly, just so we get a little more interaction going.
Yeah, so my question is, what are opportunities for diversification in commercial real estate? So, the big buzzword around residential is ADUs, accessory dwelling units, or additional dwelling units. So, if there's upcoming zoning changes that I'm seeing here locally in Sacramento or other cities, what opportunities do you see for a real estate investor to diversify, to maybe have multiple sources of income from a single property?
Mm-hmm. Well, so for example, if you have a fourplex and the zoning changes so that you can add an ADU to the property, now that becomes a commercial property because it's 5 units, right? And the standards where people are looking at, I mean, with 1 to 4 units, it's really based on comps. What's the comp that it'll appraise for? As soon as you get to 5 units, now it's based on the financial statements. And you're looking at the T12s. How many of you know or does anyone not know what a T12 is? Does everyone know what the T12s are? Okay, a bunch of blank looks out there, right? So T12s are trailing 12s, which basically means a spreadsheet that shows for every month for the last 12 months what the expenses and the income were on the property. And so, you put all the different things for expenses, like management fee. And even if you don't have a management fee, the bank will put a management fee in there. If you've got property, you got 20 units and you haven't had a vacancy in 3 years, the lender, when they underwrite the property, they're going to put the market vacancy rate in there because they're going to assume that something's going to go wrong with your property. You've had it, doing great for 3 years. And now as soon as they take the loan, that you're going to get hit with the norms, right? So they're going to put, say, a 5 or 7% vacancy in there. They're going to add that 3 or 4%, or maybe depending on what your market is, a 6 or 7% management fee in there. When you're looking at owning multi-fam or other commercial, you have other income opportunities. For example, maybe the prior owner wasn't charging for the rental of the garage space. Maybe it was included. You get your 2-unit, which includes a garage. And now there you come in and you're like, okay, we're going to be changing this. So your 2 units, when people move out, now we're going to rent the garage separate. So maybe people who don't have a garage will be renting the garage. You might even convert a garage into a laundry room if you're able to do that. So that now you have laundry income, putting vending machines in sometimes for the larger complexes so that people can go downstairs and get their snacks and stuff, and you're charging vending rates for those instead of them going to the grocery store and buying them at the grocery store. So does that kind of help answer the question, Ezra? So another thing to look at if you're in a urban or downtown area is you might have an opportunity to have residential rentals in the upper stories and retail in the ground floors story, the first floor, the street level. And some places you're able to have office space on the second or third levels with residential above that. And so we're looking at what we like to call the mixed use properties.
Are you finding that is the residential space usually more valuable than the office, than the retail in the mixed use? So let's say if we're looking at a mixed use property where the ground floor is retail, and let's say retail is having a rough time right now, are you seeing that it may make sense, if possible, to convert the retail to residential? Or is that true now? Has that been true in the past, or does it really depend on the location of the property and other factors?
So, the location of the property is really, really important, and how the property is configured. Mm-hmm. So you'll see some places where there'll be a mixed use project where it's still hustling and bustling because they've got the right mix of tenants in there. So, or maybe they're even office condos, where they're able to keep going. And then just down the street, maybe a block or two away, you see a retail center that's basically vacant because they had the wrong tenant mix in there, and the thing about the American spirit is that there's enough of us out there that are entrepreneurial that when, now maybe a lot of the hairdressers, beauty salons or whatever have gone out of business because of COVID, and they didn't have the business coming in, they can't support their leases. And now there's this salon space that comes open, and someone is like, I've always wanted to own a beauty salon, or I've had a cosmetologist license for 20 years. And they'll go in and they'll convince the landlord to let them take over that vacant space. And the landlord is happy to take the space. I just probably this week, some space that I helped a restaurant rent in Grand Rapids, Michigan is opening up. And the person had a prior restaurant. The restaurant where they were at, the owner of the building didn't maintain the building, and the building was actually condemned. So they had to close down the restaurant because the roof was leaking and things like that. The owner wasn't willing to fix it up. And so this person, they'd been working in other restaurants, not as an owner of the restaurant, but as a manager. And they were just waiting for an opportunity where some space would become available at what they could afford. And they had enough equity in their house and other assets. So the landlord was willing with a personal guarantee. You know what a personal guarantee is, right? It's where you're putting your other assets on the line. So if you can't pay the rent, the landlord could come take your house away or come take your savings away. And so they were able to convince someone to lease them the space. And now they're opening up an Asian food restaurant up in Grand Rapids, and we're able to help them do that. Does that answer the question?
Yep, it does.
Okay, cool.
Any other questions?
So how about if I just call on some people? I'm just curious. So James and Gina, is that right, Gina? All right, so talk to us. You know, what did you find of value? There must have been at least one little nugget they found helpful in today's discussion.
Like quite a bit was helpful. It was interesting hearing more about just the lending terms in general. We had looked into something a couple years back and then ultimately decided to go a different direction and put our money into single family. I don't know about for you, but it was just kind of nice having that reiterated, because now we're, getting back into looking towards commercial from a couple different perspectives.
No, the percentages of what you have to put down for commercial lending, I wasn't aware that it was so significantly different. In my mind, I was just picturing having to put 20-25% down, and the fact that it goes so much higher in certain cases, that's something that we'll definitely be keeping in mind as we continue to check things out.
Well, and remember too, the reserves are really big too. I've seen some lenders that'll require a minimum of 6 months reserves to pay that mortgage. Well, we call it debt service in commercial real estate instead of calling it a mortgage, but to pay the debt service, the principal, the interest, the taxes, insurance, and have money aside for maintenance. And a lot of the lenders, they'll actually require that reserve fund is maintained for the entire life of the loan. With commercial lending, it's very unusual for a loan term to be more than 10 years. It's very unusual, actually. And what happens is if you get a loan today and it comes with a balloon payment 10 years from now, do you know what the economic cycle is going to be like 10 years from now? Can you predict that? Are you going to be able to refinance your loan 10 years from now when that balloon payment is due? And so that's something that's really important for people to think about from a strategic perspective with commercial real estate, is where are you going to be and how are you going to refinance? One of the prospecting strategies that we have in commercial real estate is actually going and looking at the loans that are coming due. And about 24 months before the loan comes due, we're out looking at those properties and we're making connections with the owners to find out, are you planning to refi, or are you going to be interested in listing to sell that property when your balloon payment is due? So the other thing that is really important about commercial lending is prepayment penalties. Almost all commercial loans have prepayment penalties, and it's not unusual for them to have say a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 prepayment penalty that decreases by 1 percentage point for each year as the loan progresses. So that's another thing that's really different about commercial real estate. And there's also market rate loans where they're I'm having a mental block here, sorry. Yield maintenance where they actually, the prepayment penalty goes clear up until the end of the loan. I mean, within just a few months, just to barely give the borrower enough time to refinance at the end. And so they have substantial repayment penalties all the way to the end. And that's something that a lot of the first-time commercial borrowers, they get sucked into that yield maintenance trap, and they're stuck with the property and they can't figure out how to get out of it. We also have to think in the commercial space, every year, the lenders audit the borrowers to make sure that the borrower is still creditworthy. And if for some reason you had a financial setback and you no longer have the right debt to income ratios on the property and you don't have the right reserves and stuff, they can foreclose on that loan even if you're making all the payments. So commercial lending is really, really different than residential. For the Small Business Administration loans, if you're, say, 60 years old and you plan on retiring 5 years and you've got that 25-year loan, it could be as soon as you shut the doors, now the Small Business Administration is going to call the loan. You have to pay that thing off in full. And if you're not past the prepayment penalty, you have to pay the prepayment penalties when you pay that thing off. Very different world in commercial lending. Hey, Ryan, you've been nice and quiet. Do you mind if I call on you?
Sure.
So tell me, what'd you like best, or what did you learn today?
Well, I think I'm not really in the commercial space. I'm trying to find my first single family house to buy. But I think my one takeaway from your presentation was that action beats everything. Taking that action is really what triumphs as much education as you can get.
Good. And along those lines, if you don't mind me adding another little thing.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, of course.
you know the story of Thomas Edison and the light bulb, right?
Right.
10,000 times. And he didn't count it as 10,000 failures. He
Mhm.
counted as, 10,000 times of getting closer to the solution.
Definitely.
Okay, good. DJ, love to hear from you.
Great presentation, man. The commercial space is kind of where I ultimately want to I can see myself as some way, shape, or form, whether it be through syndicating a deal or something like that. But my ultimate goal is long-term buy and hold. So, and I recognize that I like the idea of spreading my risk over multiple doors as opposed to the single family or duplex or triplex. That mitigation of risk is a exciting element to me. So always learning and taking stuff in, and I appreciate your insight.
Thanks. Cool. Ian, do you mind participating?
Sure. Yeah, I don't mind. I kind of have one more question if you're all right with that.
Sure.
Okay, and I don't know if it's going to take a long time to explain, but maybe you can take a little bit of time to talk a little bit about opportunity zones and how those work in commercial real estate.
Opportunity zones are very specialized, and they really apply to high net worth people. And so it's really something that it's really so specialized that you need to deal with people who are high net worth, and they're selling off other assets where they have they want to defer their taxes. That's really where that's at. And I think it's really not germane to most people. It's one of the subjects that there's a lot of commercial people that like to talk about. Well, I could tell you all about opportunity zones, but they've never done an opportunity zone transaction. They probably never will. And it wouldn't surprise me if the new administration in DC 86s them and we don't see those continue.
Okay. And so is it true that the long-term capital gains could be basically erased after 7 years of that person being invested, or is it like a percentage?
Because it's so specialized, even though I've been through multiple presentations, I didn't memorize the numbers because they haven't applied to anything I've done.
Yeah.
Was that for a little bit of transparency?
That's why I was asking to see if you happen to know anything else about it, just because it's something that interests me, but it's kind of along the lines you said, like it's kind of more for high, earners. They're trying to get rid of some of the taxes from either stock investments or other real estate transactions. So I was just trying to see if you had any more information or knowledge on that subject.
Yeah, you're going to get much better
Yeah,
results by Googling it. Sorry.
No, thank you.
It's
Chris,
10 years.
Sorry, go ahead, DJ.
I was saying, I believe it's 10 years. Once you hold the asset for 10 years in an opportunity zone, then you get those tax benefits.
Yeah, there's some really interesting limitations and stuff and hurdles that you have to jump to be able to get there.
Definitely.
Hey, Chris,
So one of the hurdles is that you can't do it as an individual investor. You have to be part of a syndicate. So, all right, Ezekiel, I don't think we've heard from you yet, have we?
Hey, No, not yet. Thanks for the discussion. That was a long presentation, but thank you for that. I'm not in commercial yet. I'm still residential. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm still learning about the it's completely different from residential. So I'm still learning, and that's interesting.
Cool.
Hey Chris,
Vic?
can I ask a quick follow-up question?
Yeah.
Sure.
I think this may be interesting to the group. You to follow up on, you mentioned ADUs. So let's say if we're looking at a fourplex, right? And we're able to add an ADU, so there's an additional dwelling space. Is it always true that, or is it always the case that a commercial lender will now look at it, or is it automatically the case that you now have to get a commercial loan on the property, or can it still qualify as a fourplex with an ADU? And I'm not sure, if you know the question or the answer to that, or what you've seen. And I think the question may come down to how the property is treated at the locality level, or how it's assessed, right? If it's still considered a fourplex with an ADU, will the lender look at it that way? Will a residential lender still accept it, or is it always the case that it's automatically now pushed over to the commercial space, and now the lending requirements are going to be different?
Since I haven't actually done a 5-unit that was an ADU, I don't know if they're making any exceptions. But from what I've heard from other presenters is you can take a residential property that's a 4-unit, convert it to a commercial property by adding an ADU, because their commercial lenders will now look at that as a 5-unit instead of a 4-unit. So now it fits the guidelines that they can lend on.
So they will go off of the actual physical setup of the property, as opposed to whether it's still zoned as a fourplex or not.
Well, as soon as you add that ADU, I think it now qualifies based on the county as being 5 units, but that could vary by jurisdiction for all I know. I'm not sure.
Gotcha. Okay.
But you would want to make sure that it's rented so that you got 5 tenants in there so that your rent rolls are showing 5.
Right.
Yeah, let's see, who have we called on yet? Ezra? Did we talk? I think you spoke, right?
Yeah, we were talking about ADUs and fourplexes, so come around full circle. But
oh, that was you.
Yeah, that's
okay,
definitely
sorry.
an interesting topic for sure. Thanks.
Yeah,
I think
kind of thinking that the people who turned off their video, they're hiding behind their names there.
I think the commercial space itself is more new, or maybe foreign to a lot of investors in the residential space, and so I think a lot of people are in a deep thought process and thinking, not even sure what to ask.
Yeah, I agree with that statement.
Yeah.
Now,
do you guys, anyone else have any question, or maybe something that somehow relates to commercial, residential? Oh, and Chris, can you also maybe clarify maybe how this works, or how to properly see or talk about commercial versus residential? For example, you're talking about commercial real estate, right? But you're mentioning that about the portfolio deal that consists of 14 units that's a mix of single family and duplexes, right? Which are individually residential. So is it proper to say that's a commercial type of transaction because of the number of units involved, right, or residences involved, even though they're individually residential? So is that whole purchasing process somehow now different, as opposed to if they were sold individually as single families or duplexes? Like what was the right way maybe to approach that, or we can talk about that?
Yeah, and see, that's one of those situation type things. So this particular portfolio has multiple loans that are tying multiple properties together. And so the owner wants to sell them based on which loans are tied together, because there's a bank fee to separate the properties, and also they have to pay off mortgages and different things. So you can, when you go 5 units or more, doing groups of properties that are financed together, move them from a residential to a commercial class.
So it'd be like a portfolio type of loan.
Yeah.
Where it's multiple properties that under one loan. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's some lenders that will do that and some that won't. Yeah.
Got it.
So by the way, everyone, I don't know if you know this, but if you look at the chat and where you type your message in, there's 3 little dots over there in the corner. And if you click save chat, then it will actually save it to your hard drive. And then when it does, it gives, at least on my computer, it gives a little green line. And then it has in blue show in folder. You click on that, it'll open up the folder on your hard drive where it's storing the files so that you can look at the chat later. And again, if you want to connect with me, I welcome people connecting with me. Text messaging is the best way. So if you send me a text message, you can text me 24/7, 365. And please include enough information so I know why you want me to call and who you are. So, so like if you, first met me here, maybe just put, hey, Chris, thanks for speaking at the West Sac Real Estate Meetup. And I'd like to talk to you about whatever the subject is. And then we'll schedule a time to talk. But I always like talking to people who are interested in commercial real estate. The other thing I'm always interested in, if you have a friend who is a realtor, I'm always looking to build my team. And so my goal is to have 50 agents on my team by the end of this year across the United States. And hopefully by the end of this year, we're going to be in a lot more than 9 states.
Thank you, Chris. I think this is a good time to actually shift over to our networking session. But I know we need to let you go so that you can take care of some family matters, and we can just continue networking. What I will do is, after the meeting later this week, I'll send out an email with everyone's contact info. You guys can save the chat here, as Chris mentioned. I'll also send a chat file in the email, and also included the information that Chris talked about regarding the classes, the commercial real estate classes as well.
And thank you everyone for being a great audience and for letting me come chat with you guys this evening. Anyone who wants to connect with me, please do. I am in Tennessee dealing with a family medical emergency. So if I don't get back to you right away, please give me a little bit of grace. It may be a couple of days, or maybe remind me after 48 hours if we haven't connected. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, Chris. All right. So before we break out into smaller groups, I want to, DJ, I want to give you an opportunity to share what you shared with me this morning. Maybe just a quick highlight. I'm interested to find out a little more about what you'll be doing, and maybe you can share with the group.
Thanks, Sergey. Yeah, so those of you guys familiar with West Sacramento, we recently got a new mayor, Martha Guerrero. She took over for Christopher Cabaldon, who was the mayor for 20 years here in West Sac. So it's like a complete new regime change, right? And there's a number of boards and committees and whatnot in West Sac, and one of which was the Economic Development and Housing Commission. They were looking for some people, so I signed up, interviewed with her, just shared with her my story, what I'm doing with my business and financial education and the stuff that I got going on. And I got a letter that I was selected to be I don't know if I'm the commissioner or I'm one of the people on it, but the letter said, "Dear Commissioner Dawson." So I'll be on the Economic Development Housing Commission here in West Sac.
Awesome. Congrats.
Congratulations.
I'm excited.
That's awesome.
I really don't know what it's going to entail, to be honest with you, but I'm excited about an opportunity to represent for all people and try to make some changes around here. So I know it's been pretty difficult for a lot of people to, from what I've heard, and Striggy, I got to talk to you about this a little bit more, but the permitting process and the whole new construction, I heard West Sac is notorious for being tough to work with. So that's a big thing I'm interested in seeing what I could do there. And then I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Mercy Housing project going on West Capitol. You guys may have seen it if you're in West Sac, but it's a huge homeless transition project that's going on. It's a monster building. I'm not sure exactly how many units. I'm sure it's going to be over 50 units that is going to be dedicated to this right here in West Sac. So that's something that I'm really passionate about. And I kind of just backed into it and got selected. So I'm ready to rock.
Awesome. Is that the project, right? Like the next block past Rayleigh's?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. The
Yeah,
huge one. You've seen it.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. No, that's thanks for sharing. And it's going to be interesting to just hear, in the future about what's, what your involvement entails, and maybe you can give some insights as well. So hopefully, there will be positive influence, coming from this. That will help will make it easier as far as investments go, but also like ultimately the goal is to make housing more available, right? And so oftentimes that's where the housing and economic policy comes in, or oftentimes that's where it makes housing tougher to build or tougher to renovate and so on.
Right. Yeah. People are on the streets today. That needs to be addressed now, not through litigation and red tape and all the stuff that comes with that seems to tie these projects up for years and years and years. And then the money just gets dropped right back into the city's general fund. So hopefully we could do something and represent for the bigger pockets West Sac group where it all started.
Awesome. Thanks, DJ. If you guys, so usually we jump into breakout groups. I know that we also have, prior to that, kind of a general conversation. Maybe there are some questions anyone wants to address or ask before we do the breakouts. Go ahead and feel free to do that now before we break out, just to give you a chance to do it. Any maybe updates, anything you want to share or ask?
I'll jump in. Guys, I'm looking for a deal right now. I'm looking for a flip. So if anybody got one or something that might have some legs, we can get finder's fee, partner on it, whatever it may be. I'm looking for a project, and they seem to be getting harder and harder to find. So anybody got anything, let me know.
Awesome. Thank you. Anyone else? It seems like it's more an awfully quiet group this meeting. Probably the commercial real estate topic. Topic is a hard one to wrap our heads around. All right, so let's do breakout groups. Hopefully we'll get a chance to all talk with each other. So we're doing 4 breakout groups. I'm just about to open up the rooms here, and I think we have just enough time for just one session. So about 15 minutes or so. Let's see. All right, so I'm opening up the rooms and you guys will get a chance to join.